Okay. We are back and out of executive session at 7:08. We'll continue with the agenda. The next item on the agenda are minutes. We have two sets, one from December 5th and one from December 9th. Chair would be looking for a motion.
Move approval of the minutes of December 5th, 2023. With any
Page 3. Hearing no request for modification, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Moving on to the minutes of December 9th.
Move the approval of the minutes of December 9th with any necessary corrections.
Is there a second?
Second it.
Page 1. Hearing no modifications, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed nay. The ayes have it. Minutes are approved. Next on the agenda, public comment. This is a time when anybody in the audience or anybody participating remotely is free to make any comment basically about anything. We are going to be having a public hearing on the budget, so if that's one of the topics, you do not have to wait for the hearing, but you might want to consider that. But is there anybody who wishes to use this time to make a comment during public comment?
You want me to talk about budget right now?
You can if you want to, but we are going to have a public hearing coming up where we'll probably have more back and forth, but it's up to you. I mean, if you, yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, wait.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Eric, is there anybody online?
Nope, no one online.
So next, town meeting TV update. O'Rourke.
Hi, folks. We're sort of juggling things today because we have Scott is not here with us, and Jordan, who's presenting this, is actually running your meeting at the same time as we are here with
So
you.
we can talk about him.
We will talk about Scott because we appreciate him a lot, and you get to spend a lot of time with him. But so I'm here with Jordan Mitchell, who's behind the camera and is going to come over. I'm Megan O'Rourke. Okay. My name is Megan O'Rourke, and I had been the channel director of Town Meeting Television, and I'm now working as the projects director at CCTV. Our former executive director, Lauren Glenn Davidian, has stepped down, and we are doing a co-director model. So we have a couple of tiers in the organization. CCTV is the parent organization that runs Town Meeting TV, the Vermont Language Justice Project, CCTV Productions, and manages the CCTV archives. And so Jordan Mitchell, who is our Town Meeting TV director, is going to do the presentation on tonight's budget request. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So thank you for having us. My name is Jordan Mitchell. I'm the co-director of operations for Town Meeting TV, and this is Megan, as she introduced herself. So we're here to present what is our fiscal year 24, your fiscal year 25 budget, and give a little bit of an overview of last fiscal year. So last year, Town Meeting TV produced and supported 1,386 programs for our member communities, and 362 of these programs was municipal coverage. For Williston, we produced 45 select board and DRB meetings. The contract stipulates production of 3 meetings a month, or 36 meetings per year. And so we covered 125% of the budgeted number of municipal programs, covering 45 out of 36 expected meetings. We didn't really cover much general programming last year. It was entirely municipal content.
Sorry, Jordan.
What happened?
Oh, it came back. There we go.
Give me 1 second.
I think it's coming back. It just came back on my screen.
Did it drop?
Yeah, it dropped for a second, but I think it just came back.
Yeah. I think we went through that.
Yeah, it's back.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. There.
There we go.
The ultimate multitasking.
Yeah.
Yes, I appreciate it. A little bit of multitasking tonight. So we covered a lot of municipal programs stuff last year with your select board and DRB meetings, but not much of anything else. So we would encourage you, as there's other things going on in the community, that's also something Town Meeting TV is available to cover. We did just cover, when was the last holiday? Memorial Day? Veterans Day. We covered the Veterans Day event that was just outside Town Hall. That was in this fiscal year. But as there's other things happening that aren't necessarily meetings, but you think, oh, that would be great. You get one of those a month. So please let us know, or your Town Meeting TV trustee is Helen Morgan Parmet. You can, if you don't want to directly contact me, you can through her, let her know of things that are happening that might be interesting, and she'll coordinate with me. So municipal coverage, great. We're doing a lot of it. We would also encourage you to cover some other things. So Town Meeting TV is funded in large part by the cable subscribers of Comcast and Burlington Telecom. Municipal contributions help to cover other operating costs. This year, we are requesting an FY25 Williston municipal contribution of $13,891 for general operating funds. This is a 5% increase from last year's contribution, and you can see this history in your packet or on the website. Secondly, we have an exciting update from the legislature that we're looking for your support to help get over the finish line. So CCTV is part of a statewide organization known as the Vermont Access Network. We've been working for the past several years to find a stable and permanent funding source for community media centers across the state. We've been successful in receiving one-time bridge funding for the last few years while some research was happening, and now we're ready to bring a proposal for a permanent solution to the legislature. So to show support for the request, we're asking for organizations and municipalities to sign on to a letter of support, which would then be shared with legislators during the 2024 session. And this is not in tonight's packet, but if this is something of interest to you that you want to add to another select board agenda, I'd be happy to share it. Lastly, I want to thank our field producers. Scott Moody is not here tonight, but he's usually your field producer, so him for all of his hard work. Luna, who you don't see, but is controlling things virtually right now so that I can sit here. Thank you, Luna. Who's also Town Meeting TV staff, as well as your trustee, Helen Morgan Parmet, just for their continued support. So thank you again for the continued partnership and the opportunity to present. Are there any questions?
Questions from the board?
So I think in the budget, you're requesting a 5% increase by the towns, and that amounts to how much for us?
So for you all this year, it would be $13,891.
It's well worth it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll add that legislative bill now has a number H575, and it will be introduced, I think, in the Senate and the House at the same time. It's called the Community Media Public Benefit bill. And as Jordan said, it's looking to find a different way. As you know, right now, cable subscribers pay for this coverage, the meeting coverage, the election coverage we do, the internship support, and the other kinds of community coverage and programming of the channel and other various ways that we distribute the content. So beyond the cable channels that we used to just record your meetings and put them on cable TV, and now, like so many places, we're doing what we can to promote, to stream those meetings in various other locations, archive them, etc. So,
Other questions or comments? It is an invaluable service, so thank you for everything you do.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Next on the agenda, police services report. Eric, you want to lead us into that?
So the select board received and reviewed a report by Jim Baker for police services. It was first presented at last November the 7th and further discussion last December the 5th by the select board. Following that second discussion, this agenda item is to follow up to consider action to accept the report and task the town manager with drafting a 5-year community public safety enhancement implementation plan for consideration by the select board during this calendar year. And my thought is the initial step of that process would be for me to prepare a draft outline for what that would encompass. I know at last discussion we talked about that and what the scope would be. If the board wants to consider action tonight, that would be my thought to get things started. I would prepare that outline to then inform the rest of the plan. We thought about this plan as not only the police component of it but also looking at other aspects of community safety, including fire department, and thinking about kind of the community justice center as well, and overall social services and assistance in the community. A number of those things were covered by Jim in his report as well, but I think we're finding we have a good report with a framework that he's developed, but working on an implementation plan would be the next step for the town, and think about the factors of that, and including the fiscal impact and how to phase that over a period of time, and looking at where the town wants to get from an operational standpoint in the coming years. So that's my suggestion for the board to consider possible action tonight. There's nothing that needs to happen right away if the board has further discussion or questions for staff and thoughts about how to structure this.
Questions?
I have a lot to learn about the Community Justice Center. It'd be interesting that we could have a discussion with Crystal Lee and maybe Chief Foley sometime about how this, offenders are, sent to the Community Justice Center, and just the whole process, how it works. I think it's going to become a big issue in the town. We're going to be, we're getting more and more into it. We're spending more money on it. I think we need to, it'd be nice if we understood more about it.
Did we have I was looking to see if it was on the ARPA list, but a concept of having a public safety impact fee assessed going forward?
Yeah, that's one of the projects in there in exploring that viability for a fee as part of a future capital facilities discussion.
So in terms of you creating this outline, it's kind of like 5-year plan. This is not something you necessarily need to do in with the consultants or with this is something that we're doing in-house.
Yeah, my thought would be I would take the lead of putting it together, but I would need to call on a number of staff members and resources. I may need to look externally for some thoughts, and may need to engage the consultant on a limited basis if there's some questions there. But kind of I think first identifying what we want the scope to be and how it will be encompassed, what those main aspects are going to be, and then if I get consensus from the board on what that looks like, then really flushing it out at a great level of detail, bring something back to you to look to formally adopt as the plan, and understanding that plans are plans and plans can change over time, and especially a multi-year plan, but trying to get a roadmap in place that I think it can let the community know too that what the planning efforts are, and I think it dovetails to the comp plan work you're going to be reviewing with the Planning Commission over the next year and a half as well. Public safety as a component and chapter of that this can help those discussions along, and think about the immediacy of some things to do the coming fiscal year, and then the next 4 to 5 years after that. And I think it's important to build a feedback loop into this. We think 5 years in the future, but after that, what's the process to refresh that and think about the following 5 or 10 years after that. It's not okay, we made this plan, we did this plan, and now we don't do anything else type of thing. It's just getting the town as it continues to expand its services and capacity, and what that looks like from a planning standpoint for public safety in years to come.
How long would it take to get an implementation plan drafted and before the board?
Good question. It's January 2nd, so I set a goal for 2024, but I think realistically, I think I could get something to the board by late summer. I think that would probably be the initial timeline.
There's no attached budgetary requests because it's you primarily doing this or not.
Yep, no additional budgetary component. I think I'll have a better sense once I get going if we need to draw on some other resources, but probably if they're on a limited basis. I think it would be helpful to have this in place and get this to the board preceding your FY26 budget discussions, because if we're talking about a plan and any additional staff in the coming years, so the board can make some of those initial decisions, and I can build that into the draft budget for FY26 or FY25 discussions right now. But so that kind of goes along with my late summer, early fall timeline to precede your budget discussions for FY26 that you'll be getting into a year from now.
There's a question.
Sure.
So how does that planning, part of the report talked about staffing needs, you can't recruit people at all. I mean, I would hope that the town isn't going to wait, to implement whatever 5-year plan comes in to address what seems to be really urgent needs now. Especially when you look at the Observer article a couple of weeks ago. That's not painting a very good picture right now for the town.
Yep. Yeah, in terms of the shoplifting and that. Yeah.
And, not enough officers, 5 officers, we need way more officers. Recruiting's like next to impossible the way things are right now.
Yeah. Well, the part of that will actually be in the budget that we're going to be talking about, but I would say that that's certainly not going to be, we're not going to wait for a report to start trying to recruit and make sure that we have full staffing levels and try to address what we can already. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep. So, further questions or comments from the board?
You want a motion?
Yeah. I was going to say, if not.
I just happened to have one. Let's see. Move to accept the police services analysis report as transmitted by consultant Jim Baker dated November 2023. And further move to task the town manager with drafting a 5-year community public safety enhancement implementation plan for consideration by the select board during calendar year 2024.
I second.
We have a second? Is there
Second.
further, we do. Is there a further discussion on the motion?
Did Mike second it?
You did.
Yes, okay, no.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The town manager is thus directed. So,
Get started. Thank you.
so next on the agenda, actually, we are a couple minutes ahead of schedule. I'm going to actually ask the chair emeritus, does that make the hearing completely illegal if we started early?
I think it does not, because if you're going to start it and have a short presentation before we get actually into the public's comments.
You could do number 10. Don't we have a appointment or something?
Yeah, actually, let's jump ahead to that. Eric, can you talk about Mr. Vance?
Yep. So the town's a member of the Chittenden County Communications Union District. I recall I served as initial representative for the town, and then Michael Vance was appointed. He works in the field of telecommunication. Myself and Aaron Dickinson have served as the alternates. I was reminded by Mr. Vance in December that the bylaws are 1-year term for each representative that runs on a calendar. So hence the board receiving to consider his reappointment for a year. I know he's currently serving as chair as the CUD. I know he's doing a great job. I chatted with him. They've got an RFP out right now for assistance and kind of working to implement the work of the CUD. Plan to have him visit the board probably in February to give a more in-depth update. So that'll be a good time after that RFP is awarded. Recommend he's willing and interested in another year. Recommendation for the board to consider reappointing him for a 1-year term, and along with Aaron and myself as the alternates to can carry on.
Questions for Eric? No questions? We'd be looking for a motion.
I move to reappoint Michael Vance as Williston's representative to the Chittenden County Communications Union District for an unexpired 1-year term through December 31st, 2024. Further move to reappoint Eric Wells and Aaron Dickinson as alternate representatives to the district for an unexpired 1-year term through December 31st, 2024.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Aye. So, if there's no objection, I think we will go into the public hearing. So, I believe I have to read at least a little bit of the notice, which goes on for 5 paragraphs, but I'm only going to read one. So notice is hereby given that the Williston Selectboard will hold a public hearing on Tuesday, January 2, 2024 at 7:30 p.m. in the Beckett McGuire Meeting Room at Williston Town Hall to receive comments on the proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2025 and capital budget and program for fiscal years 2025 through to 2030. A remote option to participate is available. If people on, we can get them as well. So that opens the meeting, that opens the hearing, and I will ask Eric if you could just give a brief overview of the budget before we open up to comment.
Yep. Thank you. And for everyone watching, these materials are also available on the town website under the homepage. And we also, if you go to the town website address/budget, we're putting all budget materials there as well. There's the transmitted proposals by the manager, and we'll have additional proposals and or rather recordings of all discussions and meetings and materials over the next month as well. So I'll just briefly, I gave an overview presentation with my transmittal in December on this budget proposal. So it endeavors to deliver the same level of municipal services as currently provided. And as always, as we put the budget together each summer into fall, it's a multi-month team effort. Couldn't do this work without our great team of department heads and our finance director, Shirley, to work through the details of this budget. So the main themes this year, we're seeing increased operational costs, mainly driven by wages and benefits, professional services costs, and capital equipment. The overall budget proposal now is a 1.2 million increase, or about 8.7%. On the revenue side, we've increased our local option tax receipts revenue forecast by looking at prior year experience and seeing what our potential future revenue from that source may look like. The tax rate has an initial 3.5 cent higher rate estimated with a flat grand list projected by our assessor to balance the budget. That means about $34 per 100,000 of value for a property, or just under $9 per month for a median homeowner with an assessment of $300,000 is the median home assessment in Williston. Also mentioned in the manager's budget, but not initially included, are high priority staff positions to consider adding to this initial proposal. These include, as identified in Jim Baker's police services report, a police detective that would be initially filled by an incumbent staff member, but the budget amount would backfill that incumbent patrol officer going into a Bureau of Criminal Investigation. So it's growing capacity there, and adding a second police lieutenant position that would oversee the build out of a second unit within the department focused on community outreach and engagement, among other aspects, including BCI supervision and dispatch supervision as well. Also includes the addition of a human resources director for the town and elevating a currently part-time buildings and grounds position to full-time. And this, along with the capital budget proposal by detailed line items and including a more comprehensive presentation I gave, are included on the board materials, or any of the members of the community can certainly email me or stop by if they'd like a copy of these materials as well.
Thank you. So this is a public hearing, so anybody who has input, questions, comments, or concerns, please, we very much want to hear from you. I would ask if you could come up to the table, just identify yourself. It's not a terribly formal thing. It's not like you get sworn in or you have to remember your lines in a school play or something. So, but yeah.
Glad I don't have to be sworn in. Okay. So my name is Lynn McClintock. I'm a resident of Williston. And before I begin, I want to thank you for your time. It is a huge sacrifice on your part to give to the town of Williston, and I appreciate what you're doing. I'm coming here tonight because I had the good fortune of being on the steering committee for the Recreation and Community Center, and I really, having been through this process 3 times previous with the same outcome 3 times, I'm kind of hoping that we take the information we've been given and make finally a move forward where we're getting our hands dirty rather than continuing to ask about it. I know that funds are tight. I do understand that, and I think that you are creative. The town of Williston is creative, that we can find a way to make this community center work. It's a place that is not going to affect one person or one group of people. This is a center that benefits all of Williston, and it is so necessary. So I'm just coming to please ask that we continue moving forward on it. not a financial person and will never pretend to be, but, you know, I'm going to do whatever I can to help make this work. And in with that, probably you've been aware that we're in troubling times and there's a lot of talk about mental health. And so I now want to also support the recreation department, which also serves every facet of our community and is with, it's a, well, more than a two-person, but Alex and Todd have done a tremendous job increasing and trying to meet the needs of Williston. To me, being able to recreate and do something in my form of recreation may be very different than yours, Jean, but we all need to recreate, and that is part of our mental health. So I want to just also support the recreation department and what it has been doing for Williston and what it continues to do, and it really works to be creative, starting little just with a rec zone, trying to find a place that we know we can't depend on the school like we have in the past, but to provide alternatives. So I just wanted to, that's what I want to say, and thank you for your time. I just know that the budget's going to be tight, but these are two areas which I think benefits Williston and helps Williston move forward. I mean, I think it's a real vital part, and that's all I got to say. But thank you. Thanks so much for your time, and I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Lynn.
Thank you for coming forward to speak.
Welcome. It didn't even hurt.
You didn't have to swear.
Other folks with input, questions, comments, concerns?
Just on that point, the only place that I saw the library and the community center coming forward in the budget is as part of our ARPA decisions, right?
Yep, that's correct, to advance that to the next phase.
Right. And is the next phase to get it all the way to a vote, or is it?
Nope. No, good question. It's to look more detailed design and costs that would come from that design for the library component for an addition, and for the community center to explore potential sites within the growth center as initially recommended by the steering committee, and also the schematic design for that, for what it would need for a site. So it as a long process with the capital facilities project for both of these, it's continue to advance it to the next phase.
Okay.
Come on up, sir.
Hi, everyone.
Eric.
I am Eric Howe. Some of you know me. I'm the chair of the Conservation Commission. I've been a member of the commission 14 years, since 2010. And I've been serving as chair for the past 2 years. I'd like to speak a little bit about the memo that's in front of you from the Conservation Commission regarding the Environmental Reserve Fund. You'll see in that memo that the Conservation Commission is again requesting an ERF appropriation of $150,000 for the next town budget. The ERF is the town's savings account to have cash on hand when a desirable parcel becomes available for conservation, whether that's acquisition or in the form of some form of an easement. Last month, we invited people from the town to come learn about and celebrate the lands that have been conserved in town, most of which were supported with, at least in part, with ERF funds contributing to those acquisitions or the easements. This room was packed, right? Yes, it was packed. Where Erin Dickinson was here, and she had to sit in her office back there because there wasn't enough room for her to sit out here. She had to listen from back there. Setting aside funds into a savings account to conserve land it's not as flashy or immediately rewarding as buying a new fire truck or hiring new police officers or buying snowplows. It's not going to save lives. It's not preventing a crime. It's not going to reduce car crashes. But conserving town lands and protecting priority parcels from development is important. The packed house in here last month was just a small demonstration of the value conservation of lands has to the residents of Williston. As our population grows, more and more pressure will be placed on our existing conserved spaces as more people want to step outside to recreate or just enjoy some quiet time in the woods. The town needs to be able to plan and act strategically to provide more spaces like the Isham, what Mike's been able to provide at his farm, like Sucker Brook Hollow and Five Tree Hill. In that memo, do you all have the memo? Great. So on the second page, you'll see a figure in there. When that figure illustrates how the assessed value of lands, which is the green line, has increased over the past 30 years. And that also illustrates, the figure also illustrates how town contributions to the ERF have decreased over that same period, that orange line or yellow line. This means that when we do access the ERF account for a project, it takes longer to replenish the account to a meaningful value, an actionable value. It means that there is more time before the town is able to respond if projects come up in between budget cycles. And it also means that we have fewer funds available to leverage grant funding. So it's hard to put a real value on our conserved lands, but I can say that our trails, as you know, our trails are free and open to anyone, as they should be. At the current assessed values, the average property, as Eric just reported, is at $300,000, is assessed at $300,000. An ERF allocation of $150,000 would mean an average $20 per average household. The town contributed $50,000 to the ERF last year. So really this is a $15 per average household increase over last year, or an extra $5 per tax payment to go toward future land conservation projects here in town. For context, day use admittance for adults to Vermont state parks is currently $5 a day, or $30 for an annual pass. Increasing the ERF contribution to $150,000 is less than 1% of the current proposed budget, which seems like an appropriate expenditure to justify conserving these lands for future Williston residents. Thanks for considering our request to the town. Happy to take questions.
Questions for Eric?
So first of all,
Yes.
I'm all in. I'm all in. I
Yes.
like the 30%, but I just, and this maybe not a fair question for you. I've never been involved in one of these negotiations, but if you have a really healthy fund balance to buy land, doesn't that put you at a bit of a disadvantage when you're negotiating how much to pay for the land?
I don't know. I guess is that like akin to the strategy some people take with saving for college funds for their kids?
Well, you know what? That's not public information. This is public information.
I don't know. I've never thought of it that way. All I can say is
I'm a
that
math
when
person, and I love the way you laid it out. This is what we want to buy. This is how much I need to save. It like I love the way you laid it out, and it totally makes sense. But then I was like, well, I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been, as I mentioned, with the commission for 14 years. In my time, the town has acquired, I don't know, half a dozen or more parcels. And I don't think that has ever come up. At least I haven't been involved with the actual landowner negotiations, so I guess maybe I can't speak to that intelligently. But usually it's the conservation value is based on an appraisal that's done by whoever is going to end up holding the title, either for the easement or the acquisition of the parcel itself. Usually, in my experience, it's been with the Vermont Land Trust or another land trust. And so they handle most of that. And I think that, it's on them and the town to make sure that we're paying a fair value. So I don't know that necessarily that someone would look at what we have available in the ERF and say, oh, you've got $5 million. I'd like $5 million for my 100 acres, please.
I would.
Yeah. Well, then the town might say, well, you know what? Maybe it's not that important, that valuable.
Yeah.
But it does, having a balance. I didn't mention this in my remarks, but our goal is to achieve and maintain a balance of about $800,000 in the ERF. We have never been, in my experience anyway, never been anywhere close to that. We used to have a goal of around 400 or 450,000 when I first started working on this issue with the commission about 10 or 11 years ago. And then we realized that property values have gone up a lot. And the amount that we're paying per acre of land has more than doubled, maybe even almost tripled for conservation parcels here in town. And that's why we're realizing that if we really want to be able to work on more than one project or have a shorter recovery period from an acquisition, we need to have a larger balance. And that's why we'd like to see a balance of 800,000 in there. We'll take what we can get. I could ask for 800,000, but
More than 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Other
And it'd be more than $20 an average household too.
questions for Eric? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you Eric, for the time.
Come on up.
Hello, my name's Danielle Doucette, and I am on the Parks and Rec Committee, and I'm the member that serves on the Catamount Community Forest Management Committee for the town. So I feel like, thank you. I need to follow up after Lynn and Eric because of what they're saying. Like I see it at the meetings, and I also would like to ditto Lynn's thank you. So my meetings take like, I don't know, an hour and a half a month. And I feel like you maybe are way, way, way past that. So thank you for all your work. And I would just like to really quickly say I support what they recommend. A recreation center and putting more money into the ERF fund just goes to improve our, I don't know how Williston views itself as a community, a place that supports the mental health and the well-being of all our residents. And that will just, it's a great step forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. I'm Drew Morton from the Williston Community Food Shelf. When I was here for the ARPA fund allocation meeting, I mentioned adding a line item for the food shelf to the town annual budget. And Eric told me this is the best place to come to talk about it. The town budgets money for lots of obvious things: police, fire and rescue, administration, parks and rec, library. It also contributes to some other more indirect things: land conservation, energy conservation initiatives, Green Mountain Transit, Winooski Valley Park, community justice, affordable housing, to name a few. The Food Shelf Board thinks that the food shelf also belongs on that list. We do get a grant annually from the Town Social Organization Committee, but we do have to apply for it, and it is never guaranteed. As the Select Board and Planning Commission approve more affordable, elderly, and transitional housing, the need for police, fire, rescue, and community justice arise in direct proportion. I know that Chiefs Foley and Colette and Krista Lee have all had dialogue with you about exactly that. What you might not consider, though, is the food shelf is significantly impacted by those kinds of approvals. We are also impacted by the high cost of living here and the fact that prices have been raising at a really rapid rate. The transitional housing that is now across from Guy's Farm and Yard, where the Town Place Suites was, has brought us over 50 new clients a month. That's a lot of people. The chart I passed out to you shows that in the first 11 months of 2023, the food shelf saw 883 more families than it did in all of 2022. And I know from being there many, many, many hours in December that it was the same. We are now seeing 300 families a month, which is 100 more than we were seeing in 2022. As some of you know, the Williston Community Food Shelf is a 100% volunteer organization, and we have no guaranteed source of funding. We spend $7,500 a month in rent and utilities and $10,000 a month in food. It is a complete fallacy that food shelves don't have to pay rent and that they get all their food donated. We are not lucky enough in Williston to be in some church basement or a public hall, so therefore we pay market value in rent. We have a great landlord. He doesn't raise our rent to the extent he raises the other people in the building, but we pay rent and we pay for our food. the Food Shelf Board would really like to be able to start a dialogue about how we could get some much needed funding help from the town. We're not asking that you pay 100% of our budget. We realize that. I mean, it just isn't feasible. It would be awesome, though, to have dialogue about how we could maybe get a little bit of contribution towards rent and maybe some food costs, just so that we knew we had a cushion for a couple of months every year. Thank you again for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Questions?
How many people a month do you have volunteering now working at the food shelf? Just helping.
We have about 30 volunteers a week to cover the 3 shifts that we are open and all of the schlepping that we do of food. What we get for donations, what we buy, what we have to deliver. At the end of every shift, we take our leftover food to another food shelf so that nothing is wasted. So we have about at least 30 volunteers a week.
I'd like to thank those 30 volunteers every week.
They do a hell of a job. It's a
Do you have a sense of like, so you said 10,000 roughly a month, but you've had an additional 100 families this year that you're feeding. Has that $10,000 you're spending a month remained the same and you're just having to stretch it farther, or is that an increase?
The $10,000 is what we are up to. Thankfully, over the holiday time, people give us a lot of food.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's going to happen. Come July, the food shelves are bare. So it'll be way more than that. Right now, that's what we were spending, which is higher than we were before, obviously.
Yeah.
So what do you have for capital monthly overhead stuff? Do you have like a electricity budget because there's a freezer? Do you have?
We have lots of refrigerators and freezers, and we do pay our own utilities. So yes, we have electric for that. We have electric to keep the lights on. We're only open 3 shifts a week so that the lights aren't on, 40 hours a week or anything like that. The freezers and refrigerators do take electricity. We were given a huge anonymous grant during COVID, and we purchased all commercial grade refrigerators and freezers, which upped our capacity and decreased our energy consumption, believe it or not, because we weren't dealing with 25-year-old refrigerators and freezers. But that was great. So we didn't have to pay any of our own capital money for that. Somebody else paid for it, which was a huge gift. Yeah, it was really great.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other folks with questions, comments, or concerns for the budget during the public hearing?
Well, Kevin Thorley, Williston resident and Energy Committee member, speaking for myself, not on behalf of the Energy Committee. I did not make the December 9th meeting. I have read through the proposed capital budget. I am encouraged to see every department head saying they're considering electric vehicles for the replacement of their vehicles when the time comes. I'm less encouraged because I've heard those words 4 years in a row. And I'm wondering what the select board can do, or what we can ask of the department heads to help us understand how they're thinking of that. It's easy to say we're considering an electric vehicle option. But as these come up, the budget cycle tends to be kind of tight, right? So if they haven't done the work and we're about to replace one and it's not funded as such, then that opportunity is lost for the next life cycle of that vehicle. I think the only one that I saw outside of the grounds care equipment, the only thing I saw was the 2019 Tahoe, I think it is, from the fire department, that might be up for replacement this year. They're considering electric vehicles for that. But I'd like to encourage the select board to encourage the department heads to be a little more, share a little bit more information about what they've considered and where they're finding opportunities, where they're finding that they might have some shortcomings with what's available to them today. And also we're going to inevitably be in a situation where if the fire department were to buy a new, say, F-150 electric vehicle to replace the Tahoe they have today, have they, are they going to be behind the 8 ball in terms of not having done the work to install the charging stations at the fire station? Same with the police department, same with the town hall. So encouraged to see everyone's thinking about it, but I know they've been, quote, thinking about it for about 4 years now since I've been attending these meetings. I'd love to see a little bit more information from them about what they plan to do and what the Energy Committee can do to assist them in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other folks with questions, comments, or concerns? Eric, is there anybody online?
Nope, no one online that wishes to make a comment.
That is the case, then I believe we'd need a motion to close the public hearing.
Well, I'd move to close the public hearing on the draft proposed fiscal year operating and capital budgets.
Is there a second to the motion? Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have.
Thanks,
Thank
Lynn.
you.
Thank you, Lynn.
So next item, tax increment finance, TIF district. Eric? I'm always feeling a bad.
I mean,
Lynn's coming back.
Lynn, you're back for the tax increment finance discussion?
I'm putting a cover because it's gonna snow tonight.
That
exciting
for everybody? A little
bit of snow?
And I put this in slide form today to make it a little more visual, so just give me a moment. And I just texted Matt, he's gonna come over and be part of this discussion with me. Just bear with me for a minute here.
It is warm in here. Faces. I guess if you want a quiet tax hearing, you just have to announce a 6-story building in Taft's Corners the same week.
Yeah, we can pick the heat down too if it's too warm for everybody.
Yep.
Shirley, would you mind putting the heat down just a couple degrees?
Eric, I heard Avery's going to be on the legislative page. Is that right?
He is. He just started his first day today. Well, it's officially tomorrow. He was down there today getting his beige coat and tie, and like he aged 5 years right in front of him.
That's exciting.
Hey,
That's exciting.
exciting.
So Matt, we're actually ready for the tax increment finance.
The crowd is obviously bated breath.
Running the other way.
So I'll kind of go through the nuts and bolts of my memo here, and I asked Matt to join the discussion to talk about kind of the nexus of the town plan and the vision plan for Taft Corners as we think about this concept here. This is one of the potential ARPA projects, and I know I brought it up to you in December, but didn't really give it its due diligence for such a huge topic area. So we made some time tonight to go over this in a little more depth. It's informational. The board doesn't need to make a decision on this tonight. It's going to be part of your ARPA discussions ongoing, but want to get the dialogue started on this concept for the board this evening. So tax increment financing. TIF's an impactful economic development tool allowed by the state of Vermont to leverage public infrastructure investment with development potential for an area. Under a TIF, incremental tax revenues generated by private investment within the district is set aside for a period to pay down debt incurred to construct public infrastructure improvements. These improvements could be things like streets, water, sewer, stormwater facilities. TIF districts that you might be familiar with in the area are South Burlington City Center, Winooski Downtown, and St. Albans Downtown. I pulled for the graphic just a visual of South Burlington's TIF Center from a rendering back in 2015, and it's built out a little bit different than this, but give you an idea of where we're talking about. It's their city center area. So the process to establish a TIF district begins with approval by the elected body, the select board, and an application to the Vermont Economic Progress Council, or VEPC, which manages the program, which is a part of state government.
Can I just stop you for a minute? Because
Sure.
I'm really been struggling to wrap my head around this, so I don't want to start off wrong.
Yep.
So in this situation, we apply and everything. If you can establish a TIF district, the town invests in, say, infrastructure, private builders and stuff come in to build there, and then the taxes that they would pay for property taxes can be used to pay for the debt that the town incurred to put the infrastructure in.
Yep.
And the big thing is that school taxes count there.
Yep.
Okay, I'm good.
And I've got a picture to show that.
Now, wait, the only downside that I saw was that if that tax investment isn't enough to pay the debt, the town is still on the hook for the debt.
Yep.
Okay.
That's it in a nutshell. So this process, it's governed by the state, and there's only so many districts that are allowed. There's a cap on the number of new districts allowed statewide. There's a cap for no more than 2 new ones per county. Matt and I chatted with the staff of VEPC to kind of get a read of where things are. You may see in the news, TIFs are certainly a hot button discussion in the legislature and the state auditor's office as well. We believe there's a window right now for Williston to explore this. The cap is not met statewide. There's additional new districts available, and we don't have a read that any additional Chittenden County communities are currently looking at it either from our discussion right now. So we have a window to think about this. I think we have an opportunity to take a look at it.
Why is the state doing this? What's their motivation for giving up all that tax revenue?
Ultimately, it becomes an economic development stimulant tool. I think from where you're able to help move along new development by the public infrastructure investment, that takes that away from the private sector to have to make that investment, or the town to come up with it through other means. So it's been proven as a powerful economic development tool for communities. And that's where the state looks to get involved to help spur that for towns.
So I can certainly see the town wanting to do that for parts of the state that need help developing economically. I don't think anybody would look at Taft's Corners and say, wow, we need to help Williston invest in growth in Taft's Corners.
We'll get into that a little bit.
Okay.
It's this nexus with the application called the if not then argument, and there's different ways that towns can approach that.
Okay. Oh, wait.
We'll get into that.
Very excited. I couldn't hold it.
I think we discussed this earlier, like several months ago, about Jeff Davis, right? That, that portion of the road, over there behind Hannaford's, correct?
Yeah, so that's if we could hold that too. I'll get to that too.
Yeah.
If I could just lay the groundwork here for another slide or two.
Yeah, pick it up, Eric.
Yeah,
We're really excited.
it's good to be excited because
I'm trying to understand it, that's all.
yeah, it's critical if the town pursues this. The select board needs to be behind it because it's a multi-decade commitment to a district here. So what we're looking at is the pre-step here is to do this viability analysis to answer some of these questions. We'll dig into a little bit more here. Then the board would need to make a decision. Does it want to apply for the application called the TIF master plan to VEPC? They have a board that would need to approve it to get that district created. Ultimately, if a district's created, any debt incurred within the district all has to be approved by the voters through a bond vote. And then with public infrastructure improvements, they must be funded in a form of bonded debt. The first debt must be incurred within 5 years of the district's creation. So your first bond needs to be on the bond sale within 5 years. You have 10 years to incur all the debt for the district once the district's created, and the district only exists for 20 years. So we'll get into this about tiering different projects and viability and analysis for development as part of the consultant's potential work. But this was my chart. I tried to visualize this. So how does it work here? We're talking about a complex economic development tool. So I'll try to walk through the shading I did here. At its heart, it's a public-private partnership. You take the original taxable values established for the parcels that encompass the district. So think here's the South Burlingtons. They decided to draw their line around all these parcels. When they established the district, the grand list value as of April 1st of that year the district was established is the original value for the district. So that's this green box here. So as the district, the intention is to stimulate this economic development with the construction of public infrastructure, for example, the street, sewer line, water line, those type of things. The private property owner then develops the property adjacent to the new infrastructure. Think vacant parcel, a street is built, and now that once vacant parcel can then develop, filling in those gaps there. So once that parcel develops, it's going to have an added value post-development. So that's the increment we're talking about here. It's original value from when the district's created to the cumulative value of these parcels as the life of the district when you start to add improvements to them by making investment in public infrastructure to stimulate these improvements coming along. So that increment here, the blue box, is created. So that's where the power of the tool exists here when you get to tax revenue. So you can take that increment and you can use that increment created through tax revenue to pay down the debt for that public infrastructure that was built, the street that was built, the water line that was put in. The real power here is up to 70% of the education tax increment revenue and at least 85% of the municipal tax increment revenue can be used for the purpose of paying the bonded debt for TIF projects. So, usually the education fund is taxed at the education tax rate for each parcel, and that goes to the Montpelier to manage. For the parcels here in the district, the added value post-development, that education tax is going to be retained locally at 70% of the tax assessment in order to pay down that debt service over the life of the district.
So the state will continue to get 100% of its education tax dollars off of the original basis.
Correct. So it's using, and I bring that up because the education tax rate is in Williston here is much higher than the municipal rate. So the yield from that tax revenue is significant. That would be retained locally for a public infrastructure projects here. The town would also retain a portion of that increment, but it's much lower. It's about 15%. I think there's some room to decide where these numbers land, but the education tax number is a number that it used to be higher. I think it was up to 75%. Now it's 70%. So that's what this little triangle represents. The state still gets its piece of that increment, and the general fund gets a piece. The big part of it here is this blue shading. It's that incremental value paid on the debt over time.
So I have a parcel that happens to fall in the TIF district.
Mm-hmm.
The Conservation Fund doesn't want to give me $5 million for it, so I have to develop it myself.
Yep.
So I have a parcel that's, I don't know, say it's worth $1 million as just a vacant lot.
Mm-hmm.
Town puts water, sewer, and a road through it, and then I build buildings, and now it's worth $15 million.
Mm-hmm.
So the blue box is the difference between my vacant lot with nothing on it.
Yep, that's correct. So the new value, so of that increment of that, say, $12 million increase in valuation, at whatever the tax rate is for the education fund and the town general fund, that percentage proportion of that would then be used to pay down the debt service. So the critical exercise here is to make sure you're not getting in front of your skis, that you're going to bond for these public infrastructure improvements, and that you're confident that the district can yield enough revenue over the 20-year lifespan to repay the infrastructure improvements that were put in place. So it takes coordination with the property owners to get a sense of, your first debt that you take out is critical within that first 5 years. You want to be able to be yielding increment there. So you want to make sure we build X grid street that we're going to have potential development along that street so we can start getting that revenue to pay down the debt service shortly after it's built. Mm-hmm. What we think about is different tiers for these projects too. It's probably identifying 6 to 8 key public infrastructure projects the town thinks would move this along, and then being confident that we could hit that tiered approach over time by thinking about what the overall debt burden is going to be. Because ultimately, we need to create the revenue through the increment to pay it back. So that's the real heavy lift, and why we're recommending a consultant do this work with the town, because they're proven in most districts in the state to be the architects of designing these financial analysis to say what's the viability scope here. Let's go back to my notes here. Yeah, you've got 20 years for the district. After it sunsets, the new value is going to be, think of this as all green after 20 years. So then it goes back to the town's grand list is going to increase by that value for what it taxes, but then the education fund is going to get everything from the district again at that point. So try to think of another way to look at it. Kind of what we were just talking about. Undeveloped parcels in the district, call that X, the original value. A street built using bonded debt to connect the parcels at the debt cost, that's Y. The variable term here. The parcels develop stimulated by that street connection that's created. The parcels collectively assessed added value in the TIF increment, the blue from the example, call that Z. Taxes are then assessed, municipal and education. That original value X, or the green box, is taxed as usual, 100% to the education and town general funds. The Z value, that's that blue box, the added increment, that's taxed with 70% of the education tax revenue being used to pay off the Y variable, the debt, along with up to 85% of the general fund revenue from that increment. So our current tax rates this year, the education rate in Williston is $1.67 per hundred of assessed value. Municipal is 33.5 cents. Those will be likely going up in the coming years. So once part of the math here too is to think about that, what could you yield from this increment, and understanding how much are these projects going to cost as well, factoring in inflation. So it's a very powerful tool that municipalities have at their availability to look at here. And this is where I'll kind of turn things more to Matt, but possible benefit here. There's been extensive focus on Taft Corners the last couple of years with the advent of our form-based code. It came from this vision document, helped spur along the writing of the code. It's a tool to leverage and assist with moving forward a vision for the growth center. It's a defined funding mechanism for infrastructure improvements. So your question, Mike, with Trader Lane as an initial grid street, it's been something the town's been trying to build for about 15 years. And we feel like we're getting the ball, close to the end zone, use a football analogy, but we've had to do the funding through state grants, through lots of impact fees we've saved for years, and then working on a payment of future impact fees to close the gap. We'll get the estimate from the engineers this month to see what that number looks like. But, if the town wants to continue to build out grid streets and infrastructure in the growth center, that model is long and arduous one with lots of unknowns. A potential TIF district, if it works, creates a stable funding mechanism. Well, I won't say stable depending on how it's structured, as opposed to looking to piecemeal these additional projects over time or just rely on private investment for them. As the town thinks about its goals and its growth center, how does it want to invest in infrastructure for the future, and does it want to look at this as a tool to do so here? I'll turn it to Matt at this point.
Well, and Eric, I'm glad you used a picture of the cover of the vision plan. That's sort of my part to talk about, which is, the form-based code project was really about creating a set of development standards. What are the rules and what is the rule book we're going to hand to the private sector and say, this is what we want you to do if you would like to build in Taft Corner. So we talked a lot about architectural design. We talked a lot about where buildings go on sites. We also mapped out a complete filling in of that grid street pattern in Taft Corners and talked about why having interconnected grid streets with sidewalks is important to making Taft Corners into a more cohesive and livable place. So we handed that rule book to the private sector, but knowing that it calls for a really significant investment in infrastructure, much of which would become public infrastructure once it was built or eventually. So the process that Eric is talking about, making a preliminary assessment of what sorts of infrastructure projects would be necessary in Taft Corners and what sort of development might they encourage, that would come in and meet those standards. It's a really great planning process to figure out if this particular fiscal tool makes sense for the town to pursue further. It's also a really great planning exercise to start thinking about, well, gosh, all that stuff we put on the map back in 2020 and 2021, what's that all going to cost, and what are some of the upsides and risks associated with going in and partnering with the private sector to construct it. So we've talked a lot about streets and sidewalks. Folks may remember part of the form-based code was adopting an official map. We created parks and green spaces on there because our planning commission said, hey, if a whole lot of people are going to live in Taft Corners, it needs to be the kind of place you'd want somebody to live that would include public amenities. We also acknowledged in the vision plan document what we called in a section called overarching issues. What are some of the factors that play into whether this vision can be achieved? A significant one was stormwater treatment and water supply and wastewater treatment. So there's infrastructure like the streets we drive on, but there's also those critical utilities that we all need or that our development needs. And particularly when you think about stormwater, physically, there are good places for stormwater treatment to go in Taft Corners or adjacent to it, and there are not so good places for it to go. And we think about that as we're working on that Trader Lane design. Where's all this new stormwater going to go, and how are we going to handle that? So going through that project planning exercise of what physically are the kinds of projects that might be necessary for that vision to be achieved, and then would the creation of those things allow the kind of new development to come in that the town envisioned in that vision document? And ultimately, what would that do with the grand list? And therefore, would it be self-sustaining financially? So, there's a far out goal of a TIF, which is if it's something that people feel they want to take on, would it achieve this vision? There's also a really nice intermediate goal that's achieved through that planning process, which is we start actually putting down names of projects and map locations of projects and potential price tags on them and thinking through all of that. I talk a lot about it because it's in my backyard. I can see the South Burlington City Center TIF from my backyard in South Burlington. Encourage folks to take a look at the site the city has put up there because it talks about what the projects are that they have funded with that district and how that interplays with what the private sector is bringing to the table and how that's all kind of working out. It's a really good living example of that. I know about it as a citizen because I see those bond votes for each of those projects come across. So whether it's funding a portion of the pedestrian passage over Interstate 89 to UVM campus, Market Street itself, the public park that's part of the Market Street build out, a portion of City Hall and the library, some reworking of Williston Road's frontage that will actually be forthcoming in the next couple of years. There's a whole variety of projects there. And, similar to Taft Corners in some ways, you're looking at a piece of land where maybe was the question, is it ever going to get developed? Not necessarily, but is it going to be developed to the city's vision, but for the city's participation in creating all of that framework that's necessary for it to happen. So it's a way for the town to think about how far does it want to lean into what's going to happen at Taft Corners. I think we have reached close to the end of what we can demand through our regulatory system. It's pretty darn exacting. It's pretty significant requirements. The transportation impact fee, I think, is as large as it will be palatable to have it be, $2,000 a trip almost for some time. It takes a long time to accumulate that money. You're only allowed to accumulate that money for so long under statute, which is a challenge. And literally the time frame of accumulating money and achieving permits can start to come out of alignment. So part of this is about money, but part of it is also about timing. And, this is a really good opportunity to get some of those preliminary questions answered. And even if the answer is no, TIF doesn't make sense in Williston, we would have a really nice, set of projects that we would understand, a menu that we could use in our future planning coming out of this process.
just to wrap things up here, the ARPA proposals to work with the firm White and Burke out of Burlington, that they've worked with most TIF districts in the state. Matt and I chatted with their staff about our potential and our thoughts here, and they certainly see a potential viability to explore. And as I said, it's finding what the right sized approach is, and it's trying to work with someone to understand the economic aspects of this, and really needing to have support from the select board level to move forward, obviously, and also it's a vision for the future for the community. So the scope of their work would be this kind of pre-application work, determine the feasibility of the district, reviewing the private development projects, related public infrastructure investments that are necessary to incentivize the private projects, and evaluate the possible boundaries of the district, and do the preliminary financial viability assessment. That's what I put originally. And as over the holidays, my quote for that service is $30,000. Time and materials based, so it could fluctuate some. But then to think about, if the board wants to move forward with this through your ARPA discussions, and it's determined that the town's a good candidate for a TIF district, the select board wants to say, let's go ahead and apply and put together that TIF master plan application, we can engage them again for that work, to help us craft that master plan. It involves preparation and adoption of that written TIF plan and analysis presented to VEPC. A lot of work on that end too, and that's likely in the $30,000 range as well. I didn't have these both numbers and what I put together in December. So, it's, as you think about it, you could think about funding the initial evaluation of it, but just know if it turns out that's something you want to pursue further, staff would likely recommend working with a consultant to make sure we get that master plan put together well and presented well, all the analysis that comes with it, to manage this. So my suggestion is, as you think about this as an ARPA project, to think about maybe a $70,000 number or so to build in just some buffer space in this with the two steps. You could allocate the first step, and then maybe hold back some money to have if you want to move forward to step two. They're likely would deliver this in the second quarter of the year, so we would probably see it by early summer. So if we gave them the go ahead in the next month or so, it's probably the timeline we're looking at here. So that is TIF in a nutshell. I know there's many questions likely.
The thing I'm kind of bumping on, and it's probably just because I was not involved in this vision work, but the town is discussing spending $70,000 in order to put a program in place to take a risk, fairly large, sizable risk, to put in infrastructure to encourage growth in Taft's Corners. And I think when you were going through the South Burlington one, there was a lot of things that South Burlington could say, hey, we're finally getting our library, we're finally getting a park. There's a lot of things that I could see people in South Burlington saying, I'm willing to support this because there's a lot in it for me. And I would need to think a little bit about how do I wrap my own head around, does the town need to take risk in order to help develop Taft's Corners? It seems like it's, growing pretty fast as it is. So I'm not saying there isn't one, and I'm not asking you to answer that, but I would need to be able to articulate that better than I can do today.
Yep. Yeah,
And part of it could just be the one thing that I think people don't get when they post on Front Porch Forum is that it could just be, this is how we manage so that it grows the way we want it to grow, right? It's not grow or not grow.
I really want to answer your question.
Right, so that's what I would need to be able to articulate that better.
In a really short way, just to say that once you start as a public entity investing in the place, you get to make a lot more decisions about where and how you invest. So another element of the vision plan was a concern that the form-based code area is over 800 acres in size, and there could be sort of this unfocused growth that doesn't really gel together as one central place over, even 20 or 30 years. And one of the tools that's identified in that overarching issues section as a way to bring some focus to Taft Corners is through directed investment and sequence of investment by the town, which is something the town can control. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, depending on how you manage infrastructure projects, you're managing the completeness of the street network. So you can think through, some of the dead ends we have in Taft Corners right now and things that, just kind of, there's a great plan there, but it's not done yet and it might not be for a long time. You can start to pick and choose which of those you want to see all the way through first. And lastly, that infrastructure investment can lead to better compactness of the development that does happen, particularly around things like utilities and stormwater that might otherwise have to be managed on site. So if you start to have a more coordinated plan around some of those things, the site that develops can develop in a more compact way, which actually lets it provide more of its private open space for residents if it's a residential project, because some of the infrastructural stuff is actually happening off-site in a place that is more economical or makes more sense. So it's a little bit more about control.
Okay.
As I'm getting older, I've seen a lot of growth, I remember hearing my dad talk about having to stop across from the Staples Plaza coming out of Burlington to let the cows cross the road. I think growth is inevitable. We need, the roads, the water, the stormwater, wastewater. We also need the fire, the police, the food shelf, and the related services that go with the growth. I think, as we are becoming a suburb of Burlington, which is what we are, You could call us East Burlington now. I think, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. We're going to have Burlington's problems. I think, that the ARPA funds would be better spent just supporting the existing services that we have here in town rather than using ARPA funds to push growth. Let's use the town money to push growth. Let's use the ARPA funds to support our existing services like the food shelf, the conservation committee. And we have a lot of services in town that need the money. I hate to see this ARPA money that is only here for a short period of time be used for long-term growth. It's just something to think about. I'm not against growth.
Discussion for the board, ultimately.
My question is, do you have a particular, maybe you don't want to say, maybe it's too soon, but do you have a particular area that you feel is likely to be designated, or is it the entire, form-based code that you're thinking would be designated?
I think it's probably premature at this point. I just don't want to go on the record. I think part of it is it's the work to analyze the impact of the district, because you don't necessarily have to. It's scaling it too and deciding where to draw the line. So part of that would be the analysis the consultant would help us with. But I've seen there's districts of many different shapes and sizes, and part of it on the other side too is you are committing that grand list growth to the district over time too. So that's not growing the town's grand list during that period of time. It's in the future, but you're achieving infrastructure debt service that you would, conceivably using the tax levy to pay down otherwise. But there's arguments for and against, and that, that's certainly something to be aware of as well, and how you delineate which parcels for it. But because I don't want to say exactly, it would be speculative on my part without having better eyes on that. I've done this work before.
So then my other question is really related to, based on the other examples we have of tips, are they, one, successfully paying that debt service through the TIF revenue without, having to utilize their capital? Can that debt service be fully covered by that? Is there an example of that happening? And then after that 20-year period, so we have 10 years within the one that is established to incur the debt service, and then 10 more years of the TIF being operational. Are there examples of TIFs having paid off that debt service within that period entirely? Is that possible?
Yep. I think we can look at some TIF audits. So the state auditor's office audits all the TIF districts. I know they just did South Burlington. They've done Winooski's recently. I think, otherwise in the news too, there was audit with Burlington with some adverse findings that they needed to correct. A lot of that's just staff capacity and overall management and the reporting component of it. But that's the critical point in making sure you don't take on more than you can pay. And part of that is some of those larger projects in the earlier iteration of the district, if you kind of think of those different tiers within that 10-year period, you likely want to bring on some larger, more expensive projects early on so you can stretch the debt further over the window of the district as well. So, you know, maybe you think a larger Trader Lane type street, that would be an early project, for example, just to throw something out there. Trader Lane wouldn't be part of this because we have it on its own trajectory right now, but those are just the questions that we would need to get some guidance on and answers of how to shape it.
Any questions or comments? Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Mike.
Matt, it's
Wish
been
I had
3 weeks. This is the longest time I haven't seen you since I started on this board.
You know, I was thinking, I spend a lot of my time telling you and the planning commission what each other is up to. Gotta all get together sometime.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. So, next on the agenda, budget deliberations, ARPA funding allocations. On this, no rules, and certainly the chair has no authority to dictate what these discussion goes. A couple of things to keep in mind. We need to wrap our heads around a bunch of things, including the bottom line budget number, the dollar figure that we're talking about, ultimate tax rate and tax increase, things to consider. ARPA fund use, obviously, reserve fund use, and specifically some things, staff requests, positions that are in the budget, whether it's consensus on that and just basically thoughts on the budget. So what I would like to do is open it up just to a general discussion of the budget, possibly with those talking points as possible thoughts, but certainly not mandatory. And start with that. But people's general thoughts on the budget. Start with that.
I'm sure I have a question for Shirley or Eric or both. And my annual question is for a 1 cent increase in the tax rate, what does that bring in? What does that cost roughly? It's been around 180,000 in the past.
For what additional cent will raise in tax revenue?
For additional tax revenue?
Yep, about 215,000.
250?
215.
215, okay, so tracking about what we've had in the past. Good. So I had a couple of suggestions to have staff take a look at between now and next week or two. And that is how it would affect the budget that we have, in my estimation, 2 critical new positions to create. And so I would propose that the HR director and the detective for the police department be funded for a half a year each. And we've been notorious for underfunding the ARF fund over the number of years, but I'm not prepared to recommend $150,000. But at $10,000, I think that's a little light. And I propose to add $30,000 to the ERF request to make it a total of 40. And funding, let's see what happens with the tax rate, but also we can think about ARPA funding on that.
I know we talked about this before. We can't use ARPA funds for the ERF, right? Because it needs to be good and substantive, right? Okay.
Yeah, the spend deadline.
Yeah. But we could give our services because they will spend the money.
Yep, right, Shirley, if we allocate it via grant, that is our obligation.
So, yeah, it's a little more trickier with a rule change. So let's just use the food shelf as an example.
Sorry, Shirley, would you mind coming up to the
Oh,
mic,
sorry.
just so
Yeah,
folks at
yeah.
home could hear you?
So if we use the food shelf as an example and think of what obligated means now, so let's just say we wanted to put a line item in the FY25 budget for the food shelf, we would have to make sure that we actually gave them that money before December 31st of 24. Because by that point, we have to have a commitment, which means PO, a contract, an agreement to spend that money. Even though it doesn't have to be spent, we have to have one of those things that documents that we have obligated that fund, and that's not obligating it through the voters approve it in the budget. So, so that's just the timeline, and that's definitely a doable timeline, is to, fund them or make a payment to them before December 31st of 24. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
This is nitpicky, but this is me. The third building and grounds park FTE at $38,000. That's a half, the narrative says that's a half time, like taking a half-time position to a full-time position?
I think it's 27 hours a week.
Yeah.
So that would be an error in the narrative.
Because I couldn't find it in the FY24 budget, the other half. Like, shouldn't there have been an increase?
Let's see, I'm trying to think how we pulled that out. That's why I'm turning to Shirley, because there's
Yeah.
trading between
And some of
departments.
these things, I'm just going to send you an email because I have a couple questions along the lines of Terry's that are just me being curious about numbers. But
Sure.
that one, I just couldn't see where it went from the buildings and grounds staffing is like $5,000 going to a different number. So but that's okay. You don't need to answer it. I was just curious about that.
Are you sure? I can.
Well, as
Very
long as you're
quickly.
sure that it was in FY24 budget somewhere.
So in FY24, we have 2 full-time buildings and grounds and the part-time position. But in FY24, the second buildings and grounds position was going to become full-time in November. We moved that forward because we have never been able to fill the 27-hour-a-week position. And then those buildings and grounds people, their wages got allocated out to all the departments.
Right.
So that's why it changes so drastically when you look, and we just removed all of that allocation. So they are there, they're just spread differently. And then one of the full-times buildings ground people goes to the parks. So May to October. So those wages are moved, allocated to the parks for the summer time period. So they're spread out through the budget. And that's still true, Jean, in the FY25 budget. That part is still true. Yeah.
I rely on you, Gene, to point these things.
Yeah, I'm kind of maybe with Terry on I understand the buildings and grounds FTE ad, but I can't quite prioritize it given how high the numbers are right now. I was just wondering if they could go back and see if they could figure out. This is just a tough year with no increase in the grand list and all of these, 13% increase in salary average. That's a big increase across all of our staff. And so this is a tough year to be adding another position, but if they could find it somewhere, I just noticed a lot of little, the little things you don't really worry about that much, $2,000 for paper or whatever. A lot of them just got increased for inflation, and maybe they could go back and scrub and say, well, I didn't really spend it all last year, or maybe I could do without this whatever but I won't replace the computer for another year. Just if there's something that they could do to maybe offset that position, I could see adding it, but because my understanding is it's hard to fill a part-time position, so that's hard to justify. I'm having trouble staffing it, therefore I need another $40,000.
Yeah, I'll say too, for buildings and grounds and parks, there's a lot of potential work out there that we just can't accomplish with the staff, even with the part-time person. So it's thinking over time here, that there's, in talking with Bruce, there's additional need to complete some of the need we have today. And we make it work, but there's additional things we could be doing in our buildings for maintenance and upkeep. I think I looked at janitorial that we contract out for the library and the police department. At a certain point, if we have more staffing capacity, we could bring that in-house and offset those contracts as well, but we're not there right now. But
See, but that's the kind of thing that I would be see like, great, now you just offset it, right? But instead we're adding and we're not taking away the contract. They're both in the budget. So that might be something if they say, well, maybe, I'm willing to take that risk that if we can get this full-time position, I can cut the cleaning at the library or whatever. So
I can talk to Bruce more about it. Our initial discussion was if they got to a 4-person crew, that would be something they could take on. But I can follow up with him and see if there's any different avenues to look at.
I was going to say the other piece there is, sorry.
you might as well come and sit up here, seriously.
That we also have in the budget a 30-hour-a-week position for parks as well, and we didn't fill that either because it's impossible to hire part-time. So Todd was out doing it this past summer.
Yep.
So that position would also help in the parks in the summer as well and do a lot of deferred maintenance in the wintertime. That isn't happening.
My question is, and I agree, I think we are paid a budget and this of the 4 position, but Chief Foley was the technical priority. But of these positions, my thought is there work that we're not doing that's potentially going to cost us more money down the line because we are deferring it if we don't have the staff to do it? So if we're not doing it now, because we don't have the staff, is the investment in this staff right now ultimately going to cost us a lot less than whatever the work is that we're not doing, and it could become problematic in 5 years, whatever, because we didn't do the work.
Well, and that's why, I'm not going to sit here and say you should cut here and you should cut here. That's not my job. It's you guys got to figure it out. But it's easy to justify adding, and it's hard to justify not. But I mean, this is going to wouldn't it put us over like a 10% increase if we added all these positions? We're at 8 something now. 8. What's the increase?
Most likely, I'd have to just run it to be sure.
Yeah,
But
so, I think that would be a tough sell, so it's just my thought, is that if they really want it, maybe they could be a little more creative about figuring out a way. It's not like it's not a second lieutenant where they could find $160,000, they have to find $40,000 somewhere, so if they could make it work without a budget increase, that would be.
Right, is there a way to potentially add these positions and keep it under 9%? Is there cuts to be made? Where could we really trim something and keep it, say, under 9? To even just to add the 2 positions, or could we run scenarios where we do that?
we can certainly look at it. I can say, I'd have to see what dollar amount the 0.3, I think it's 8.7 right now would be, but a lot of this is driven by wages and benefits.
Yeah.
So we run that risk of large significant amounts to decrease the budget are likely a staffing discussion or a deferring of capital equipment purchase discussion. That we can certainly run any scenarios the board like us to run. I just know in working through these numbers, those are the
right. And obviously staffing is not. I mean, we're trying to add staffing. I don't want to decrease staffing, so I don't want to, but yeah. I mean, if there were capital projects that we could be deferring, I think that that's something we've done in the past. Potentially even to put off, for another year, or we're still talking about ARPA funding. So if there are, some of these kind of capital expenses that we could put towards ARPA, I mean, now's the time to consider it.
Yeah, we're just deferring the problem to next year, but at least next year we may not have this grand list problem.
Right.
Sort of when what we were talking about a second ago, I had a curiosity about the amount of overtime that's in our budget, and I got lost because I know some of it's contractual, so it seems that way. But anyways, I'm just wondering, when to maybe go back and, are we planning, I know it's a tricky one, you have a lot of overtime in a year because you're not staffed, right? But then in the budget, you assume you're gonna be fully staffed. Did we take down the overtime assumption? Does that make sense?
And are you talking police, fire? Or-
Everybody, there's overtime everywhere.
Yeah.
Surely people have overtime.
I think Shirley, you're probably.
Yeah. So we did decrease the PD. We had that about 150 hours overtime to down to 100.
That's good.
So again, you know, it's
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure someone took it
Yep.
into account. It's just really easy to say, this is my salary increase and this is my overtime increase, and you don't.
right. And fire, we also took down, I can't remember the exact numbers, Gene, but we also, Chief ran some numbers. I did a lot of digging and looking at some numbers as well for the overtime. But data-wise, our systems don't allow us right now, like Chief was like, okay, how much overtime comes from training? How much overtime comes from having to carry over from a shift? How much comes from shift fill because we don't have the minimum that we're required to have? We don't have that data, which would be more helpful to determine the budget. But we brought down fire as well. I just don't remember how much we brought them down. So we sort of shaved that where we could as well.
And how much do you guys scrub revenue? Because everybody seemed to be a little down on their revenue. Are people being conservative on like we're spending $40,000 on the rec zone, but there's only $10,000 in revenue from the rec zone? I don't know if that's what you're planned, or is that being conservative? That, you know, is there like?
I'm gonna grab my book.
Yeah.
Because that would be really easiest way is if we could just bump revenue up.
Yeah, historically, we've been conservative. Department heads, and this is thinking more of the revenue based on town services as opposed to the tax side of it.
Right.
I was going to say, and
Shirley runs most of those with the department heads. So.
and Todd really looks at his numbers, but with the, I'll say with the rec zone fees, a lot of what Todd has in there, he just tries to make the program pay for the contracted person so that we can have as many residents participate as possible at the lowest cost. So we aren't, I mean, that's been on the list for a while. We don't look at recreation as making money or breaking even at this point because it's that balance.
But is it in
between-
line with like the revenue from the camps, things like that, right? I mean, that's just.
Yeah, the camps make more revenue. And Todd increased those a little bit, but where he, and he tries not to increase fees much. And he does use donations for scholarships for people who can't afford them otherwise. But his dilemma for the camps is really staffing. He had a very difficult time getting staffing this year. And of course, he's limited to the size as well. So you don't see a huge increase in revenue in the day camp programs because of the limitations that are there. Contracted camps, you'll see more revenue. And essentially, I think it's Todd builds in $10 or $15, I forget what it is, per camper. Because we're just essentially organizing the camp, paying the contractor, and we just keep I'll say administrative fee for putting the camp together and doing the enrollment and then pay them out. So it's $10 or $15 per person we make from those. So Todd doesn't, essentially since I've been here, there aren't a whole lot of, it's getting more people who want to do those, we call them contracted camps, getting more people to do those and in the space we have, because a lot of those happen again at the school in the summertime. Some of them are off-site, but the majority of them are happening in the school space.
Okay, like what I said, I have no way to judge what you're saying. I just happen to
Right.
notice that like even the highway department revenue was down after I adjusted for the grant. So it's like, is everybody being 5% conservative on their revenue, and would that make up a difference?
Yeah.
Would that allow us to buy a lieutenant? That's all I'm wondering. So just something to think about.
You can take a note of it.
not asking you to do it off the top of your head, but on your list of things to do to crunch the numbers from Carrie's suggestion, the HR director and new lieutenant. Halfway through.
Yep, I'll run that scenario
Yeah.
along with the ERF. I just did math for the operating cost proposals for the 4 positions. It's about an additional $450,000. So I was trying to figure out the percentage increase here as we were talking, but that puts it at
Maybe 2 cents.
if anyone's quick here, it makes the total bottom line about $15,650,000.
And that was 30,000. I wrote notes, Terry. Did you say 30,000 to the ERF?
Yeah.
Additional. Okay.
Additional. 30.
Additional. So 40 in all.
Yep.
Yep.
So if that was, so the maximum number that we're possibly looking at is 15,650.
If you funded all 4 of these
Yeah.
positions plus what was proposed in the manager's budget, yeah, that would be the additional operating cost increase.
And that would, is, again, not tonight, but maybe next week, the answer of what percentage increase that would do to the budget, to the, I'm sorry, the tax rate.
Where's your calculator? You bought it last week.
Yeah.
Mike, it's not right here. I was going to reach over and use it.
So right now, the tax rate with the tax increase,
I get 11.4%.
Okay. 11.4.
All I did was 15.6 over 14. So
Yep.
what is
So the
this?
11.4.
11.4,
Thank you.
roughly.
Gene, what is that?
That's the tax increase if you added all 4 positions in the month.
Yeah, that's,
Oh, the tax increase percentage.
Oh, that was the general fund increase, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's what I thought you said. So
Yes.
yeah. So that would be 11.4%. We're at 8.7%. So just think back to your question, Greta, to get up to 9%.
Or
It
even
would be
less,
very-
even like 9.5. But yeah, that's also saying the 4 positions. That's including there. Like I think we've talked about maybe not the lieutenant this year, so that's 1 less. And what if we were to take, if we were to not fully, to have the building and grounds, like I'd love to see different scenarios so we can, provide the best service. I mean, we know that some of these positions are really integral for moving our town forward and for continued growth and for meeting the growth that we already, have. So, I think that, the HR director and the detective position really feel imperative at this point. But again, as Jean said, it's hard to justify adding anything if we're not also kind of, looking at things that maybe can wait a year or can, something. And 11.4, that feels really, that's a lot.
So essentially, I can tell you rough math. If we're talking, all 4 of those for additional 450,000, 1 cent on the rate yields about 215,000. You're talking a little bit over 2 additional cents there on the tax rate. I'll put this together in more detail in a memo for all of you. But one part of the exercise could be: do you want to have kind of a target bottom line percentage, and then we can work through the positions question and the possible expense reduction question to try to arrive at that, or maybe it's a range you want to fall within, and these are your goals to get within that range.
9.5.
I feel like
That's my range.
Less up to, but not to exceed.
Personally, I think public safety, a police lieutenant would be, is important.
Yeah, well, Chief Foley identified detective of the 2 positions, that the detective was the number 1 priority for the police department. So,
Yeah, and I like when he said that the work that person would be doing would allow some more patrol officers to be on patrol. So that is really important to me, I think, so.
yeah. And I think the HR position, the way I see it at least, is we have a lot of staff. We've grown a lot of staff within the past 3 years even. And I know it takes a significant chunk of your time. And we do think, things like overtime in your department and in other departments, and having an HR person to take on some of these roles that some of our staff members are taking on would potentially free up some things like overtime and things like that, because they're taking pieces from other people's jobs that, you know.
Yeah, I would certainly advocate for that as, central administrative staff and, freeing up Shirley's time to focus on finance, freeing up the town manager's office and staff time to focus on some of these big initiatives we have coming forward. That the HR component's huge on a day-to-day operations standpoint here, and there's things that come up where you need to stop everything and work through it. So.
And there's no towns that have, we have how many employees? I should know this, 80?
80 full-time, and then I think over 100 when you
Big
factor in
count, summer
part-time.
counts. Yeah, they're usually not too big a problem for HR, but so 80 employees, a full-time HR director for 80 employees. I know you're not going to get a half-time HR director, and you need the person here, but I just didn't know if there's other towns have figured out how to manage around that.
I would say that municipal HR has been kind of an ongoing discussion for years amongst municipalities. Some that try kind of a part-time or a shared position role that have hard times filling it, or it evolves over time. Towns I've connected with, they tend to have just an HR professional, the Essex, South Burlington, Essex Junction, Stowe, Colchester.
And they have comparable staff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Haycock Boardman, when they did their report, right, they said that we were kind of already past the threshold for requiring an HR director, right? Like we had surpassed that a while ago.
Yeah, that was their assessment. And, we have two unions as well. So that adds other complexities and just overall staff management as well.
I need a 911, I need a police officer. That's priceless.
True.
Police are priceless when they're needed.
Yeah.
Right, but
You
I guess
can't put a cost on them when you need them.
But I guess one could argue that if you had an HR director, you might have more luck in keeping those police officers so they're there to answer the call. So,
So do we want to give actually, do we need to give you a range, or have you got enough information to draft up stuff for our next meeting? 'Cause
Well, or maybe another scenario, so you have real numbers in front of you. So, so right now, the only scenario we have is the HR director and a detective for half the year, and add 30,000 to ERF. Another scenario that you would like us to run?
I actually don't have a scenario as much as I think my target would be, well, actually the rate of inflation now is down to 3-something%, but that doesn't really drive our budget, because our budget is staff, which is, had increases last year and will again. But I'm still thinking like something close to the average rate of inflation for 2023. It's probably arbitrary, but in terms of understandability, I think it's at least a concept. And is it too much to ask for like a menu, a checklist of like?
are you thinking like 7 or 8% kind of number?
Yeah.
Oof.
But that I don't think we're going to get that. But I think it's going to be higher. It's definitely going to be higher than that. That's my thought. It's not really even a goal. It's a curiosity. How close can we come to that? I don't. And again, I think that the needs that we have seen that are addressed in this budget are real needs, and we're not going to be able to get around them. We're not going to meet the needs that the town has if we make the budget not increase to the amount that it should increase. Right. I don't think that's going to be just the average rate of inflation in 2023. It's just kind of a thumbnail measuring thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I would, assuming it, and I did spend some time going through the numbers, assuming that there's just not a lot of fluff in the budget.
Yeah.
That means cutting positions, and it's going to come out of police and fire because those are our biggest position staff. So I don't know that it's worth
The effort.
the effort.
You guys have a light week, though.
We're always.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, yeah, actually,
No.
don't
I mean, to
spend
me-
too much time on it.
So my biggest one is just really being able to explain the salary increase at that big a number. And I know, yeah, we certainly talked about having to keep, I mean, I think this town knows that we had struggled to keep our police department intact, right? And you know, so I think there's a narrative that people would understand that, yes, we had to do this and now we're paying the piper for those decisions, but yes, we have public safety in this town where some towns don't. So okay, public safety providers, I guess. We're not really adding things. There's a little bit of, seems like there's a little bit of creep in each department maybe, but a little more overtime or a little more this or a little more, but I don't think that, I just think that people will understand an increase, but yeah, if we start getting into double digits, I think that that just starts to look reckless and not caring about people's pocketbooks, so.
I agree with all that.
What about using ARPA money for quality of life services right now instead of growth?
What?
You know, like the TIF.
But
Oh,
what
like
quality of life stuff? are you talking?
You know, the quality of life, you know, like police services and, you know, the services that the town needs to provide the public.
Well, we are doing that a little bit. There's 75, at least there's, in the proposal, there's $75,000 of ARPA money going as revenue, which is the same thing as what you're saying. The problem you have that is that what do you do next year?
Right.
That
I mean,
money
that's
goes away,
I think
and
the
now you
point
have
we've always,
mass-
yeah,
Right.
is that if we use it to hire a lieutenant this year, next year we don't have ARPA money and we have to pay that lieutenant's salary out of next year's budget, which means that automatically bumps up next year's budget on top of any other bumps that are going to happen. So we're just deferring that tax increase.
I'm talking about growth, like the community center, you know. things
Yeah.
Like that instead of, you know, the TIF. You know, instead of, you know, putting money towards growing the town, taking the ARPA money and putting it towards growing the town, making the town bigger, taking that money and using it for the, you know, the fund there, you know, Eric was talking about.
We can't use it for his fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Conservation, or use it for, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
Eric's fund.
use it for quality of life.
New name.
Well,
When I say-
That won't look good in the paper.
It is the ERF. I don't-
but
Technically, money is fungible. So yes,
Yes.
you could bump that $75,000 up to, you know, 200 and put the whole difference in the ERF if you wanted to.
Not with ARPA.
No,
Not, you don't take the check and put it in there. You increase it in your operating expenses and you
Right.
increase it in your
Right,
revenue.
right.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so yes, you could get away with that if you needed to, but
But TIF, you know, growing, you know, the downtown's important, but maybe right now, instead of growing the downtown, we take that money, you know, that's $70,000 and put it towards, you know, the revenue. There's 70,000 there, you know, we whittle away on that, find out where we can take money from that.
Yeah.
It's one-time money.
Yeah, that's my concern.
One-time money. You can't spend it on something
Right,
that's going to continue.
but spending it on growth is one time too.
Well,
But it's not,
that's
it
an
doesn't,
ongoing
it-
process.
the idea is that the ARPA is being floated for the one-time, the growth-related stuff as we're calling it. It is really just a one-time expense. It's not like we're hiring a planning director with ARPA
Permanent.
money and then we're gonna have to pay him another year and another year, another year. There's a historical precedent where the fire department, way before Chief Collette, had a proposal to increase the number of firefighters, and there was a grant of some kind
Yeah.
that, and the idea was that it would pay full freight for something like 6 firefighters, and then the next year 5, and it went all the way to 0, so that at the end of like 5 or 6 years, the cost of those firefighters was entirely being borne by the taxpayers. But we kind of like added them on with money that wasn't really ours. It was a grant, and the board basically rejected that because it was, you know, we're committing to overhead that we're going to have to keep paying year after year, but the source that we're paying it with is not going to be there year after year. And I look at ARPA the same way, that I don't want to use ARPA for just some revenue to cushion the shock a little bit with what we're going through. Yes, but not much. My thought.
Is there enough there just to at least knock our, increase down a little bit?
Yeah.
Yes.
Somewhere.
Yes. Yes, when we talk about ARPA, we could discuss if there's more revenue we want to apply, but I'm just really afraid that that number goes to zero next year. We have a huge revenue hole next year that.
That's one of the things we had done was last year, we used 150 from ARPA to reduce the tax. I can't remember the
Last
exact
year,
number.
meaning 23 or
Well,
24?
FY '24, this current budget year, yeah.
125,000.
It was 125, thank you, this year, we're currently in there. So FY '24, we used 125, and now we're stepping it down to 75, and the year before that,
300.
300,000. So we've stepped it down, we've been using the ARPA funds for the past, now this will be we're going into our third fiscal year using them to, help decrease that tax burden. But next year there will be zero, whether or not we do. If we do 150,000 this year, 200,000, that's going to be felt again that much more next year. And I think we've been tried to, be mindful of that, in budgets, in decreasing it so that there isn't a budget where it feels like, wow, all of a sudden we're feeling the full effect of all of these decisions we've made over the past few years.
How much are we putting into the community center next year?
Well, right now, it's just ARPA funding that would be proposed for it.
Proposed.
So
Much?
it's 150, they're estimating on our ARPA funding.
So there's 150 and 70 on the TIF, there's 220,000, that's over 1 cent on the.
Well, that's ARPA money.
Right.
Yes,
It's
he's
being-
saying you could apply it.
You could apply it, right,
Yes, you
yeah.
could.
Yep, you could.
And next year, that 2 cents comes due, right? So next year, you start out with 2 cents, even if you don't give anybody a raise.
Right, nobody's going to get additional services for that or anything.
Nope, it's just
But it's
2
still money that we've got in the bank
This year,
this year.
It is.
not next year.
So this year we do 12% increase. We'll see how that goes. That's all. We're just trying to figure out how to lower the increase. That's all.
Yeah.
So do you have enough of the explanation for your homework assignment?
I think so. I think, the board's target is not to exceed a 9.5%
Right.
bottom line increase. What I'm hearing is running a scenario with half year for the second police lieutenant, the HR director, and some additional ERF money. We can see kind of what the what the dollar amount looks like to get to that not to exceed 9.5% number. I'll task department heads at our staff meeting tomorrow with doing a final scrub to present to me by I'll see how quick they can scrub, but I'll ask them to do it by next Monday at the latest. If we typically do this every year, we do a final look and we come up, we cut some and we can reassess some revenue projections to yield something there. Won't promise 6 digits, but maybe we can get. We'll see how the exercise goes. I'll just be realistic with the board of what we can look at there.
One thing actually nobody's talked about, and I know that I know Shirley and Eric are well aware of it makes your skin crawl to think about the reserve fund being used to as just regular revenue, but I'm wondering if that is something that we might want to at least have as a thought to increase the amount that we're taking out of that, given the fiscal situation that we're in, that hoping we're not going to be in
And the
next
fiscal,
year.
so right now, 24,
Yeah.
it's pretty decent right now, so.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily be putting yourself in a bigger hole like you would with ARPA.
Yeah. That's looking for 'em.
Yeah, it's a policy decision for the board. I say this every year.
know.
It won't be there forever to
Yeah.
offset taxes. It's a lot of it is excess local option tax revenue you are giving back to the taxpayers to offset the property tax rate. But if we get in a situation where we needed to use a big chunk of that money, or it's going to dip below your 10% bottom range in your policy, it's again filling that revenue gap in a year. So I think we built it in a way where we wanted to bring it in with the decreased amount. We originally had it lower, but we left it at a spot where the board could have a discussion that we'd be comfortable if you decide to increase it
But right,
some amount.
right now, isn't the amount in the fund at the higher level of the policy?
It's I think it's in the upper
16.
teens, 16.5% or so.
It's supposed to be like
Quarter.
just no more than 20%.
Right.
Yeah, your range in your policy is 10 to 20% as your benchmark. You can always deviate from your policy. It's a board policy, but
Yeah, we-
that's kind of your benchmark.
I feel the way I do about our wastewater capacity, the way I do about that fund. Like, I get really nervous. It's gonna run out.
Yeah.
Keeps you up at night.
That's what I think about, guys.
So we'll come up with what that additional increase looks like to get us to the 9.5%, and then we'll see what that looks like to fund those positions, and then we'll see how we can, if we're not there, regardless, we'll do the final scrub for expense and revenue, but we'll kind of see what those numbers look like, and we'll get you some materials Friday for your discussion next Tuesday.
I know that it's probably a lot of work, but like, could we do like a leveled approach to like look at it? Like if we added just the HR director, if we added, I mean, I don't know what the salary difference is between the HR director and say like a, detective, but if we added just the HR director, if we added the detective, if we added, just.
I get what you're saying. I would say that if you had an HR director and not a police detective, that would not.
Right. Well, I actually,
Yeah.
I was in my head, I was thinking the other way around ultimately, but yes, like if we just added or if we just added one over the other, like
Yeah.
what the differences there would be, and
Yeah.
just to see. I mean,
Yeah, I think it's, especially if we're doing a half a year, that's one position.
Yeah.
I'd kind of be okay with just that.
Mhm.
I mean, if we could, at that point, I would say add those two positions for half a year. They're kind of cheating, adding a half a year, but if we add those two for half a year and then beyond that, I'd probably be more comfortable with the revenue
yeah.
as opposed to taking one or the other out, if those are our two top priorities.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I mean, I think ultimately, I think both are pretty necessary. I mean, but
I wish there was a way to get a cheaper HR director, but if there's not, I want a good one. They could cause a lot of havoc.
Yeah, I think that's realistic with the
And that's
market.
salary and benefits on the sheet, right?
Yeah, it's salary,
Yeah.
benefits, and it's also a little bit for like professional services. But I think a salary, we're probably talking in the 90 to 110 range, probably roughly, for a person with the credentials for this type of role.
do we need to do, I mean, we know we have the ARPA worksheet and we've talked about it and different things. I mean, obviously it's 9:15 now. I'm guessing now is not the time for a deep dive into our worksheets,
I
but
did have a little bit of a proposal on that though, because the ones that
Are in the
Eric
budget.
has already included in the
Yeah.
budget, I mean, are there any, maybe we just talk about those ones to make sure? The only one that I was kind of on the fence about, Greta, is something you said about paying for the first lease payment on something lease, which seemed like it was an ongoing cost.
Tasers and.
the tasers.
Yeah, I think.
Not the tasers. Oh, with the
Or the-
body cameras, the body
Taser
cameras,
body
right? Oh, tasers and body cameras.
They're
Yeah.
both included.
Yeah.
That one a little bit kind of broke the rule of one time
Yes.
spending, but other than that, do we all kind of agree that I mean, because that takes half the money away, so
Yeah.
it makes it,
And you're looking at, just so everyone's looking, you're looking under capital on page 9. If you look at that spreadsheet, that summarizes all the capital use.
oh, there it is.
Thank you, Shirley.
You're welcome. So I'm looking at the spreadsheet that looks like this. I think that's what you're getting at, Jean. is supposed to
Well, and
look at
there's a
growth.
few other
Those are
things that
capital-
are not capital, but yeah,
Yeah.
All the capital budgets.
yeah.
The dated the December 8th sheet that I highlighted, I think. That is, some that are baked into the capital budget and others that are outside of that.
But as you pointed out, Jean, that takes half of our
Yes.
balance away.
Jean, did you want the staff to?
No, I was just thinking that, so we had talked about how we were all gonna like do our
Yeah.
prioritize or how we would come up with the money, and then we put them all together and kind of see like, because I think that I assume that a lot of them would line up pretty easily, and then you just have to have a harder conversation about maybe 5 as opposed to 25. But just looking at this, it's like, well, I think the ones that have already been, if there's anything on the baked into the operating budget that we disagree with, we need to know that so that they can bake it in to the operating budget, not ARPA money.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I can't remember, I'm, I told you I put it in Excel, so mine would add up, so.
Yeah.
I don't have the highlights, but, if anyone's looking at it, or which ones were on the operating side of things.
150, 450, 650. Oh my gosh, I'm not the person to be doing this math in my head, by the way.
Well, you can just read what they are.
Yep, so it's the community spaces, like the next phase, the actual design and all of that, so that's 150. The brick church fire suppression system, which is at 300 plus or minus, and everything, obviously, plus or minus.
But that one would be a bond if it wasn't.
I
think, is that what you said, Eric? I think it said in the narrative.
A good thing, it might be helpful, if you look at page 9, that column.
That line, yeah.
Everything that's highlighted is in that ARPA
Okay.
column too, to
Okay.
help get the numbers too.
Yeah.
The parking lot, that's part of the decision here. So we were thinking of using part of ARPA, then the balance with debt. We're also going to apply for a $200,000 grant from the state this month, but we don't know if we'll get that till after town meeting day.
Right.
So part of the decision here is on if you want a bond authority for an amount of money here. We'll need to build that first debt payments, just an interest payment into the budget. It's a minor increase, but it is an increase off that debt. We can defer the first principal payment to FY26 if we want, or we could make a principal payment in FY25. That deciding whether to ask the voters to approve that bond for the parking lot is going to add something in that service budget. And we'll run those numbers too for next week, so you know what that looks like based on our central interest rates right now. So the ARPA used towards that project gives the debt a haircut for how much it is.
Right.
That's the only one that, I mean, I know it's necessary and I very much see the value of it, but, thinking about on town meeting day, having a bond vote for the town hall parking lot.
I don't know, because I kind of feel the same way about I kind of felt like the brick church fire suppression should be debt as well. Those two in one bond. It's kind of like a village improvement.
We talked about that, yeah. As we put this together, we talked about that as well. That's certainly an option for you.
Right.
You do have a presidential election this year, so you could potentially defer a bond vote to hold a special meeting in November too, if you wanted to look at this project. We don't have to do the parking lot construction this calendar year. We could do it in 25, but that's an option as well. You have a couple opportunities to ask the voters for debt approval this calendar year.
That puts the onus on the voters, not us.
Yep.
Like everything.
Yeah. Well, it's hard with the parking lot, at least. The way I see it is like, if we commit to giving the $200,000 of ARPA towards it, then we're also, committing towards, obviously the voters will decide on the bond, but it's, committing this money for something that they then also have, like.
Right, but if the bond doesn't pass, then you still have time to spend the money.
Right.
On something
It's true.
else, right?
Yeah.
But I think it does lower the number to something, it's not like jaw dropping.
Yep, yep.
Like how much are we paying for pavement?
Yeah.
And a big driver, towards the cost here is to put the conduit in the ground.
The EVs.
For
the EV.
EV charging stations
Yeah.
for both the town right behind here and for the police station for future electrification of those vehicles. That
which
that is significant cost to the
Yeah.
to the project.
And that furthers, we had talked about like a lot of these things too with ARPA money, like what does it tick off for our town, like plan goals and things?
Right.
And, it may not seem like the town hall parking lot does, but that really does because of that reason. And like talking about EVs and like this makes that feasibility going forward for our town.
Right.
So, yeah.
That was the big sale
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have trouble with page 9. Shirley's gonna have to explain it to me at some point. But, so like this community spaces, if we don't fund that with ARPA, it just doesn't happen, right?
Right.
Because it's not in the operating budget, so.
Or you make a decision to put it in our operating budget.
And still
yeah.
get 9.5%.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you're trading positions at that point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yep. Okay, so what you were telling me over here where it says ARPA capital projects or equipment funds, is that, when I was looking at page 9?
Yep.
Actually, the operating budget was the one I was immediately worried about, right? These are the,
Yeah, so everything on page 9, that is reflected in that the table that's highlighted, essentially.
Right. So the things,
there's the tasers, I see it now.
so the column in the operating budget,
Yep.
so that is being funded with tax revenues or ambulance revenues, however you want to think about that.
Right,
The fund balance column
yeah,
is not in the budget at all because that's fund balance and it's you making an allocation to use the fund balance. So we used to put it in the budget as revenue and put it in the budget as expense.
Oh.
But after talking with the auditors, said, oh, you don't need to do that.
got it.
Just you could make a decision to use the fund balance for those projects. Impact fees is outside of the budget. And then ARPA and debt is just that.
Yeah, and this shows all ARPA we've identified our capital except for the 75,000 that is operating.
Right.
So those are staff's,
Okay.
what we've baked into those two budget proposals, and then that sheet has other projects as you think about the total amount.
So Jean, I was going to this page because of your comment, right? If we don't use ARPA, it comes back to operating. So hence your discussion, if we don't want to use operating or ARPA money and you want us to go back to operating, then we should know that to run our scenarios.
Okay. So back where I was 15 minutes ago when I was still trying to find the right page. The only one I had a problem with was the body camera tasers. It felt like a ongoing expense.
Yeah.
It is. It's a 5-year program. And technically, it's really a lease.
Then I'd probably want to have more conversation around the brick church fire protection in the town hall parking lot, but I don't think that impacts that's not going to go into the operating budget, so we can kind of.
Right. Except for the debt.
Yeah, that would go to bond or
Right.
Right.
otherwise, yeah.
Although it does still have an impact, right? So if we are going to not use ARPA for those, then it'll go to debt. And then we'll need to include the interest expense and make a decision about principal. Putting on,
Or you could do it later, so it doesn't hit next year's.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
we could defer principal, but we can't defer the first interest payment.
Right.
But
Much
Defer,
much
but
lower.
we could defer the price.
Right.
800, if it's $800,000, first year of interest isn't gonna probably break the bank.
No, but yeah.
so I'm missing something. You said 800,000. So I'm
Because
looking
that's what
at.
I've noticed it down, that's what I've noticed it
Oh,
down too.
So I'm
Surely you're
looking,
not supposed to notice these things.
I'm looking at the 660 in the debt column plus the 300 plus the 200.
Well, I saw in the town hall parking lot that there was maybe 200K from a grant for the downtown program, so the 860.
Is that in the
minus
debt column?
200 minus the 200.
Yeah, I didn't include the grant in the budget.
This was from the ARPA file that he sent out.
If we receive it as a grant, we can decide to either, replace the ARPA money with that or decrease what we
Borrowed, yeah. So I was kind of hoping that would
Yeah.
happen, and so there'd be 400-ish on the parking lot and 300-ish on and I gave you an extra 100.
Yeah.
So anyways, I guess on the rest of the ARPA, I don't know that, to your point, Greta, it's late, and I don't know that we need to decide tonight if it's not, if the other ones were,
If you're good and you don't want us to switch anything else to operating.
right.
And I'll flag the body cameras for further discussion then. It sounds like that was
Yeah.
actual discussion point here.
Yeah, just because it's a recurring.
We are coming back
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah.
Was there I just remember some talk about the leasing the space in Taft's Corners next year to get started with our,
So I did get a number while I was out. I saw today. So the lease for the space is $25 a square foot. For spaces we are looking at, the annual lease is about $40,000 or so. Part of thinking, this kind of, I think, plays into the public safety planning. Jim's recommendation in getting the second lieutenant position established would help to build out that unit.
right,
So I might suggest, deferring that space until we have the staff infrastructure to manage the building.
oh, absolutely, yeah.
So that, just to give you a rough idea, numbers wise, that's kind of what that lease payment would look like. And there's certainly going to be a fit up cost to that space as well. Whatever space in town, if we want to move forward that way, though, there'll be some cost.
And I guess a little bit like the rec zone, which didn't look like it was in the budget. We just did it because it was the right thing to do and you had the revenue, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
it could end up that we have another, Christmas is really good this year.
Yeah.
And that was, maybe that the taxes come in a little bit higher and we can decide to pull it in, but we don't have to budget for it for now. We don't have to raise taxes to do it. We could do it opportunistically.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking for.
Is the rec zone usually used in the evenings or is it during the day?
Both. I think we have some outside groups using it as well. Did ask, Todd's looking into just potentially if there was some room to use more space in the building. I don't know if there will be or not, but just for, iterative planning here, whether, if the town moves ahead with the community center at some point, it's still multiple years off to build something. So
Yeah, just gotta remind Todd that less revenue he gives this community pays for the school too. So if you're not gonna pay the school, you paid twice for it in our tax rate, so.
I've just been there twice. I've been meaning to stop by there more often. It's got an awful echo in it.
yeah, the DRB had a meeting there. Well, the board had a meeting in December, and they're not going to go back there to speak to the echo. But we don't want to invest in the sound there right now because we don't know what our long-term future is. We can only get a 1-year lease at a time there from the landlord.
Because I know someone that was looking for, a space to rent. We went by and looked at it. Because of the echo, it wasn't feasible.
Yep.
So the hour is late. So I'm wondering if we can move on from the budget discussion, if people are comfortable with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
And we are coming back next week, and we also have a possible meeting that we can schedule on the 23rd if we need to. So, okay, so that being said, if we can move on to the manager's report. Is there a manager?
Yep. Just basically schedule. So next week on the 9th, we have it planned as a work session on the budget. What staff will do is take your feedback this evening, run these numbers and scenarios, and get that information to you, continue your discussion. You could decide if you want to, depending how that goes, you could chat about ARPA that night or not. But beyond what you mentioned tonight, that's in this operating budget, you can decide on ARPA more in February or early March if you want to. We have the deadline at the end of the year, so probably sooner rather than later is probably a good course to think about here. We need to warn town meeting. We need to get the annual report to the printer, I think, by the 25th of January. So ideally, if you need an extra meeting to finalize the warning, got the 23rd for that. So just for the new board members, after the work session, if the board has, is pretty much there on the bottom line, I'll have a draft warning together, probably for next Tuesday for you to have. And then we need to just plug in a number essentially and plug in the bottom line and what to raise with taxes into the warning. So once we have all that set, you just have to formally take some legal action for the motions and then sign the warning. And that could happen on the 16th. And if we need more time, we would convene to do that on the 23rd. Along with if you decide to go forward with a bond, there'll be legal documents that you have to sign a resolution for the bonding authority and that type of thing. So that,
Could you be ready for us to warn the bond for these two projects?
yep, I previewed it with the town attorney back in December as they get busy with these things. So he's supposed to get me those documents by the middle of the month, I told him. So I was hoping to have those for the 16th. So if the board's ready to go that night, we can do all the motions to get set for town meeting. And if not, the board can meet the next week to wrap that up if needed.
What's I'm sorry, the brick church you're saying?
Brick church, fire suppression, and the.
Okay. But the brick church fire suppression would only be if we didn't use our funds.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I think it's pretty popular, though. I think people would support that.
yes, so certainly, I guess
Yeah, good to hear.
with the timelines here, just thinking about it, I suggest you make that decision at your next meeting so the town attorney can prepare the appropriate bond authority documents for you to adopt on the 16th or shortly after, what that would encompass. So something to think about between now and then.
Okay.
Does anyone think that's not a good idea?
I think it's a good idea.
We can,
I get into budget mode. I just start taking over. I get so
well,
excited.
Green Mountain Transit's going to come that night too. I've asked them to come because they have a larger increase this year and typically give the board an update. The meeting's scheduled for 7. We could start earlier if the board would like. I can just make sure Green Mountain Transit could come, but that was the one thing I was thinking about this evening. If you wanted to start that meeting earlier, it's up to you.
It might make sense, but what do people think?
Yeah, I think so. It's dark earlier.
We had some questions for Green Mountain Transit last time about their like point-to-point cost analysis, and do you remember, Jean?
Yeah, they were.
Right.
Yeah, so just if you could remind them that like we wanted to know about how that.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions I had was, well, they had like a 50% increase in their senior transportation line.
Mm-hmm.
It was huge. Like, where'd that come from?
Yeah, I'll make sure they address those points. Yeah, I want to get them to the board during your review process. With that as the larger increase in the budget line here.
Yeah.
So is there a time the board would like to start? 6:30?
I mean, I'm not going to sit here with 50 questions for Shirley in a public meeting. I will probably send her an email so she can explain to me why they make sense. So I don't know that I'm going to need, 3 hours of budget. It's, I don't know how this process usually works for you guys, though.
This is about how it usually works.
Yeah, it's because I think as a board, it's not our job to go through line items. So I have questions because I need to understand it, but I don't think I need to grill you on,
So you're thinking 7?
I think 7's fine, but that's just me.
Let's stick with that.
Because it'll be the only thing on the agenda, right?
Yeah, Green Mountain Transit, that might take 20 minutes to a half an hour, then just budget deliberations till.
Oh, yeah, I might grind them into the ground. So
Yeah.
that 18 grand is pushing me over the edge.
Okay.
Then my only other thing, we're going to do a staff holiday lunch on Friday from 12 to 1. So I'm going to probably temporarily just close some departments so the staff can come over for lunch.
You missed the holidays already.
I know. We haven't been able to do this since 2019, so we're bringing it.
Okay. Well, that sounds good.
I think about
Great.
a lot of
Sounds
stuff.
like he's inviting us.
Yeah, really, I didn't hear that part. It was just to give you aware the building's going to be closed. Happy feast of the
Festive.
Wise-Men. What's the feast of the Wise-Men called?
Was it-
The
Epiphany.
feast, Epiphany. Happy Epiphany.
Yes.
That's all I have to see.
Okay. Any other, actually, other business? No other business. Final thoughts on agenda items from this meeting? And hearing nothing, I will say that we are adjourned.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Groovy.